Welcome to At Issue. As always, we thank you for joining us for an interesting conversation, this time about politics. Don't run away. It's a good story about politics. My name is H. Wayne Wilson, and we're going to be talking about Congress and how Congress actually can pay attention to process something they're not doing today. And to have that conversation, we have two experts in the studio. First, let me introduce to you Frank Mackaman. Frank is the staff member, or a staff member, at the Dirksen Congressional Center, which is located in Pekin, Illinois. And I want to say director so badly, Frank. but everyone at the Dirksen Center is a staff member.
That's right. Yes, that's right.
And I guess that's part of the process.
Yes, that's our process.
Okay, and Brad McMillan is here. Brad is he has a title. It's Executive Director at the Bradley University Institute for Principled Leadership in Public Service. We thank you both for joining us on that issue.
Pleasure.
We want to focus, we're not going to restrict our conversation to the 1964 Civil Rights Act, but it is key to understanding how Congress actually can compromise on things. And this conversation may involve Bob Michel, it may involve Ray LaHood as we go through. But let's go back to actually pre-1964, Frank, if we could. And we're going to focus on Ev Dirksen a lot. He had introduced a lot of bills, some successful, many not, with regard to civil rights leading up to the 1964 Civil Rights Act. He was so critical in this whole process. He wasn't a Johnny-come-lately.
No, Everett Dirksen had a long history, legislative history, of support for progressive civil rights legislation, beginning in the mid-30s when he served in the House representing Central Illinois. He introduced legislation to provide federal funding for African Americans to train as airplane pilots. He introduced legislation to ban the poll tax, to make lynching illegal, and to ban discrimination in employment. So as an individual legislator in the House and in the Senate, he had a record in support of civil rights. But the Congress had been unable for decades to bring full civil legal rights to African Americans. So this is not a story of one man's crusade. It's really a story of an institution, the Congress, finally coming face to face with the challenge posed by civil rights. And then it becomes an interesting story of personalities and process working together to produce the first in a series of civil rights bills, but the landmark bill, the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Brad, this, as Frank alluded to, this was a process that took quite some time, and there were some critical things that led up to the 1964 Civil Rights Act's passage. Much of that was violence. I mean, this couldn't have happened without some of these other things occurring.
Absolutely not, H. There was obvious public pressure mounting with Martin Luther King Jr. And a lot of the March on Washington, and then the violence that people saw on their television sets for the first time in their homes of what happened in Selma and other parts of the country. And so there was this mounting pressure both on President Kennedy and Congress that something needed to get done.
You mentioned President Kennedy, and a lot of people point to Kennedy as having introduced the bill or asking for a bill to be introduced. But it really wasn't Kennedy's efforts. It was more Lyndon Baines Johnson, wasn't it?
It really was, H. The truth is, President Kennedy was somewhat lukewarm on civil rights. And he did introduce, draft legislation, but I think he was worried about his reelection and getting votes in the South, and there were a lot of political things going on. And then, unfortunately, obviously, the assassination occurred. And, Lyndon Johnson took that moment. First of all, Lyndon Johnson was very passionate about civil rights, but he also understood the country's deep sadness over the assassination of President Kennedy. So he did a political maneuver where he said the greatest thing that we can do to honor President Kennedy's memory is pass the Civil Rights Bill. And that put a lot of emotional energy and motivation into moving the process forward.
But this process, Frank, doesn't go anywhere if there aren't a group of people at the top of the House and Senate who know each other. Mm-hmm. That this isn't just a, well, put this in the bill, put that in the bill, and then you can put that in the bill. They actually, Johnson and Dirksen have a long friendship, Hubert Humphrey, etc.
People play a large part on both the House and the Senate side, so it was a perfect alignment of the social pressure that Brad described, the processes available in the Congress, and the people who ran the levers of power in Congress. And you're right, the folks who led the charge in the Congress had a couple of things going for them. First of all, they knew one another intimately. They had served with them, with each other for a long period of time. They all had seniority. I think even more importantly was the fact that they understood that Congress has a role to play in addressing fundamental national issues, and civil rights certainly had become that. And they had faith in the ability of well-meaning people to work the processes to produce a result. So personal friendships counted for a great deal, and their respect for the institution and the role of Congress also played a big role.
I want to get back to the passage of the Civil Rights Act and how that came about in just a moment, but first it occurs to me that we've been talking about Everett Dirksen and how he was capable of, he had friends on both sides of the aisles, genuine friends on both sides of the aisle, and there's something about Central Illinois' history with legislators, with Bob Michel and Ray LaHood. I'd like to hear both of your takes on why that has occurred.
Well, I do think we have this very rich legacy of bipartisan leadership at the highest levels and coming out of Central Illinois. And Dirksen not only had a great working relationship and genuine friendship with his Democratic counterparts, but also with the Democratic presidents. I mean, he would go over to the White House and have drinks with both President Kennedy and President Johnson. And the same thing with Bob Michel. I mean, when Bob Michel was minority leader, the longest standing minority leader in the history of our country, he had an incredible relationship with Tip O'Neill, Tom Foley, and they would golf together, they would dine together. Now, they didn't agree politically on every issue, but they had a genuine friendship, and what they did was they tried to find common ground for the good of the country. And we just don't see that happen today out in Washington, D.C.
Polling numbers aren't very good for Congress right now.
13% approval rating according to Real Clear Politics today. People are just fed up with the gridlock and the ineffectiveness of Congress. And, I share this with my bipartisan leadership class that I teach at Bradley University, and I'm going to teach it again this spring. But back in the 1960s, when the Civil Rights Act was passed, members of Congress would vote party line on legislation 65% of the time. Today, members of Congress vote party line on legislation 92% of the time. So we don't have statesmen that are going out to Washington, D.C., independent thinkers that are going out to Washington, D.C., people that realize that maybe the other party might have a good idea once in a while, people that want to find common ground, and it's really caused a mess.
And the nature of the parties have changed. Back in the day, in the golden age of civility and bipartisanship, if you looked at the most liberal Republican and the most conservative Democrat, there was an overlap There were people in the middle. There are no people in the middle anymore. The parties themselves are more polarized. And you know, this question that you asked, why does Central Illinois have this tradition of leadership? That's a baffling one to me. Ray LaHood was at the Dirksen Center a week or so ago, and we were speculating about the causes for this. I can't come up with a definitive answer, but my best shot is I'm going to give credit to the people of Central Illinois. The Bob Michels and Everett Dirksens, the Scott Lucases of the world were elected by the people who reside in Central Illinois. They are representative of them. So their ability to listen, to make common sense decisions, to not be judgmental, to not be ideologically rigid, I think reflects the people here.
And it occurs to me that, you know, you mentioned that Ev Dirksen was able to, he was critical to the passage of the Civil Rights Act in the 1960s. You mentioned that Bob Michel was critical to passage of President Reagan's programs in the 1980s. And then Ray LaHood comes in and he says, I know how this works. We need bipartisanship. So he has the get-togethers in Hershey, families, and and it didn't work.
No, it didn't work.
Different era.
Yes. And I think I know that Ray's underlying assumption, the reason to have those bipartisan civility retreats, and what he believes the key to resurrecting that is the personal relationship that Brad and I have both talked about. That was the design of the Hershey retreats. Why didn't it work? There are complicated reasons, but the simple reason is that the leadership in Congress didn't endorse it, didn't get behind it. Well, and every member has a multiple of jobs to do. This was never the highest priority. And then you factor in the polarization of parties.
Well, and I think leadership matters in Congress, and I'm talking about who you pick as the congressional leaders. And one of the things that happened, you know, Bob Michel became minority leader the old-fashioned way. He just slowly worked up the ladder, formed relationships. You know, Newt Gingrich was kind of at the beginning of the creation of the leadership PACs, where they would assemble all of this money and then they would go around and give money. And what they end up doing is they end up buying loyalty of newly elected members of Congress to vote for them for leadership positions because of the money they got in their campaigns. And so the whole Newt Gingrich way of becoming a leader was different than the Bob Michel era.
And I'm sorry, I was just going to point out that the Contract for America that Newt Gingrich proposed, Ray LaHood was one of only 3 Republicans who did not sign the Contract for America.
And the only non-incumbent running to not sign it. The other 2 who signed it were running for re-election.
Yeah, and he has said that that was one of the reasons why he was not, he didn't call it locked out, but his ability to move into leadership positions in the House was limited, at least initially, because of that.
That's absolutely true. I mean, it's ironic. Ray LaHood sat in on every leadership meeting as Bob Michel's chief staff member. He was the most qualified to understand how leadership works in Congress. And once he's in the majority party, never once invited to one of those meetings.
Let's turn back to the Civil Rights Act. There was a process that had to be followed. The President Johnson, knew that it needed to go to the House first. Why was that it needed to go to the House first rather than the Senate?
Because the Senate had been in the history of civil rights legislation the place where it stalled. So President Johnson wanted the House to produce a version of the bill that had the best chance of passing in the Senate. And that spade work needed to be done first. And that's what happened. Although it didn't happen easily. It happened in fits and starts in the House. But they needed as perfect a vehicle to get to the Senate as possible rather than the Senate inventing it out of whole cloth.
So it moves to the Senate, and typically it would go to the Judiciary Committee. That particular legislation would belong there, but there was a Southern senator who headed up that particular committee, and it didn't go there.
No, and that's just, but in a typical textbook, you have this wonderful clean chart about how a bill becomes law, and they're neat little boxes and they're all linked by lines. That's not how it works in the real world, and that's not how it worked for the Civil Rights Bill. And I give credit to the Senate Majority Leader, the Democratic leader Mike Mansfield from Montana, for figuring out a way to overcome the traditional path through the Judiciary Committee, where it most certainly would have died. So they parceled out parts of the bill. They created options A, B, and C to give themselves the best opportunity for success.
And that was Senator Eastland of Mississippi, I believe, was the head of Judiciary. We have a process that's kind of not following the process. and process is only part of it. There's 4 Ps that you refer to.
Well, when I look at a piece of legislation, almost any piece of legislation, I think of it in terms of the place where it occurs, the context. So that would include the fact that the Democrats had 67 members of the Senate and the Republicans had 33. Then I look at the people involved, and we've talked some about that. The processes, so in the Senate that would have been the filibuster to try to hold up consideration of the bill. And then the product, the bill itself. So the interplay of those 4 factors describes how legislation occurs.
He mentions the filibuster, and we know that there's 67 Democratic senators. And how many of those, how many are Southern Democrats that?
Well, there were 20 Southern Democrat U.S. senators that were going to be adamantly opposed to the Civil Rights Bill. And so that was one of the reasons why President Johnson realized that, once the bill made it over to the Senate side, that Everett Dirksen was going to be key. And, a couple main points. First of all, it took presidential leadership, where President Johnson basically told Mike Mansfield and Hubert Humphrey, you need to meet with Everett Dirksen on a daily basis to iron out the details of this bill, and you need to treat him with respect. You need to listen to him. We need to figure out a way where he can bring along the Republican U.S. senators for the cloture vote that would lead to the passage of the Civil Rights Bill. And they did that. And, one of the things people like to talk about bipartisanship, okay? Bipartisanship is hard work. It takes time. You have to be willing to sit down and meet with people over a long period of time to try to figure out what their concerns are and how you can factor in their considerations into the legislation. And, at the end of the day, Dirksen got 27 of 33 Republican senators to vote for the cloture. And at the end of the day, Dirksen got 10 substantive amendments to the Civil Rights Bill.
And before we go any further, we need to have, for those that don't know the term cloture, that's C-L-O-T-U-R-E. There was a filibuster going on. Explain cloture and why it was critical to getting to the vote for the Civil Rights Act.
Cloture is the only means in the Senate to shut debate down and move to consideration of a bill. So it's got a different set of rules from the House. So a filibuster is talking a bill to death and delaying action till everybody just throws up their hands and says, this is not worth it. We're not going to proceed to consideration. So members of the Senate, in this case, Mike Mansfield led the charge to have a cloture petition, sign the cloture petition, then you have the vote.
And you need 16 signatures on the petition just to get it started.
Just to get it started. And to take a little bit off of what Brad just said, 67 Democrats. The Democrats had enough votes to end debate, shut down the filibuster without one Republican vote. They had 67 votes. That's what it took to invoke cloture. But because there was no Democratic Party, there were two Democratic parties, they needed Everett Dirksen and the Republicans.
And I believe that was one of the, if not the longest, one of the longest filibusters in American history.
It was the longest, yes.
So it comes time to vote. And you mentioned some numbers that Everett Dirksen delivered so many votes, but do you recall what the vote was on the cloture? Was it 71 to 29?
I'm not. I know there were 23 Democrats that voted against it, and
yes, there were. I know that each Hubert Humphrey's count and Everett Dirksen's count before the vote were both off by, I think, 2 votes each. And so I believe 71 was the total because they thought they'd hit the number, and so of 67. So I could look it up, but
no, that's okay. But my point is that the Democrats needed just about every vote that Everett Dirksen could deliver. Mm-hmm. And this was not an easy process. There was a senator from Iowa named Burke Hickenlooper. And he was kind of a thorn in Everett Dirksen's side with regard to this particular legislation.
And the reporters at the time speculated about the reasons, and I come down that Burke Hickenlooper was jealous of Everett Dirksen because Everett Dirksen conducted the negotiation pretty much independently. He didn't consult often with his Republican colleagues until after the fact, and that riled Hickenlooper. And so at the very last minute, Hickenlooper tried to hold Mansfield and Dirksen hostage by saying, I'm not going to support a cloture vote unless you give me an opportunity to add 3 amendments. And he and a couple of other senators were granted that, and I think 2 of the 3 were voted down, and 1 of the 3 was accepted. So, yes. And the other interesting piece in all of this is one of the senators on the Republican side who voted against the Civil Rights Bill ends up being the Republican presidential nominee a couple of months later, Barry Goldwater, whose name is put in nomination by Everett Dirksen.
As a matter of fact, if I recall, the California primary was just before the civil rights vote, and they delayed it because Barry Goldwater was in the California primary,
That's right.
and he defeated
Nelson
Rockefeller, but he didn't want to have to be on record as voting against the Civil Rights Act before that vote.
That's right.
So we have set the stage now, and I want to talk a little bit more about that process of getting all those votes. But the bill didn't come in and sit there as it originally was proposed. Everett Dirksen was a detail person.
Oh, he cared deeply about every word in the Civil Rights Bill, and he was determined to make sure the bill was done the right way. And there were several areas, fair employment and public accommodations, where he really wanted to see the state and local governments have first crack at enforcement rather than the federal government. And at the end of the day, those amendments were included in the legislation. And the interesting thing, H, is even the Democrats admitted that Dirksen's amendments made the legislation better for the country. So, you know, this notion that compromise is a bad thing is just simply not true. Compromise can actually lead to better legislation.
One thing that does occur to me, you mentioned that Burke Hickenlooper of Iowa probably was a little bit jealous of Everett Dirksen. He was probably really jealous after Time magazine came out.
Yes, that's right. Yes, Time magazine featured Dirksen on its cover after the cloture vote. And Dirksen, he did seek the limelight, so I wouldn't argue that Dirksen tried to hide his light under a bushel basket because he didn't. He cultivated the media. He respected the power of the media. He used the media, and he used it effectively.
And with that, we have run out of time. I certainly appreciate the conversation, the historical perspective, and where we probably need to be as Congress is concerned today. I want to point out that Frank Mackaman has written The Long, Hard Furrow You can get it on Amazon. It is, of course, Everett Dirksen's story, his part in the Civil Rights Act of 1964. So The Long Hard Furrow on Amazon. And also, I want to thank you very much, Frank. I appreciate it.
Thank you, H.
And I want to say thank you to Brad McMillan at Bradley University. And you actually teach a course in the spring on bipartisanship.
I will. In fact, I'll use Frank's book, The Long Hard Furrow, with my Bradley students. And I'll also use Ray LaHood's new book on seeking bipartisanship. So we actually teach bipartisan leadership.
And Ray LaHood's book is co-written by Frank McEmin. So,
exactly.
And with that, we say thank you to all of you for joining us in this new year. And we'll be back with a second edition of 2016 with At Issue a week from now. Join us then. Thanks.